like to now invite our next speaker, Emma Slawinski. A little bit about Emma. Emma first joined the animal welfare movement in 2011. She became the head of campaigns and advocacy at Compassion in World Farming, CIWF, in 2012, leading her team with determination and fervor. As a committed campaigner and animal welfarist, Emma went on to become the European Programs Director at World Animal Protection and returning to CIWF as its Director of Campaigns again in 2016. Today her talk is about farmed animal advocacy, the current state of the movement, and where we are headed. Emma.
Before I came here, some of my friends told me that India lifts you up emotionally and spiritually, and I have discovered that India also lifts you up physically. So it's wonderful that I can see you as well. I'm very aware that I am all that is standing between you and a cup of tea. And as a British person, I truly understand how important a cup of tea is, so I will shorten my talk. But I wanted really to take this opportunity to talk to you about farmed animal advocacy, farm animals. If I could get everyone in the world to care and react as much for a fish or a chicken or a rabbit or a cow or a pig as we felt when we saw those videos of dogs, the world would be a much, much better place. Compassion in World Farming is 50 years old. We're now 51, in fact, and throughout that time we have had one single mission, and that mission is to end factory farming worldwide. And I have some sad images, I'm afraid, to show you of what factory farming is. So factory farming can be any species, and it's farming where an animal is confined and fed grain, as a simple definition. But as you can see, that simple definition has a whole host of suffering connected to it. And I could have put more pictures up. I could have shown you dairy cows, and I know the wonderful FIAPO have had some amazing success tackling the factory farming of dairy cows in India. I could have shown you a whole host of other animals, geese and quail and ducks, all caged, all unable to perform any of their natural behaviours, and all kept confined in factory farms. There are 70 billion animals farmed worldwide every year. 50 billion, 2/3 of them, are kept in conditions like you've seen here. 50 billion. I can't even conceive what that number of animals looks like, but every one of them, everyone is a sentient being who feels, who suffers, who has a complex internal life of their own, and who deserves our compassion and respect. What I want to talk about specifically today is what's happened in Europe and in the US over the past 50 or so years with farm animals. And I particularly wanted to do that because that's where compassion mainly works. We have representation in 12 countries around the world, mainly in Europe, also in the United States, and recently in China as well. And one of the reasons we talk so much about factory farming is because we feel it's very little understood. There are, in fact, two sides to factory farming. There is, of course, and central to the lives of all of us here, there is the animal, but there is also the grain, the food that is required to feed to that animal. Because you have kept that animal confined, they can't create any of their own food, you have to bring the food to them. And that means you need to grow fields and fields and fields of crops to feed to the animals, using pesticides and fertilizers, clearing land to grow that food. And for every 100 calories of grain that you feed to an animal, you get only between 17 and 30 calories back. So it's a massive waste of food. We could feed so many more people if we just ate the grain ourselves. This system is completely crazy. So there really are two sides of factory farming. And as I said, we of course here care about the animal welfare in particular, and I'm sure you won't be able to see the detail of all this slide, but this talks about some of the wider consequences of this way of producing food. Factory farming is a huge contributor to climate change, to pollution, to obesity, to a whole host of diseases that are passed between humans and animals. It uses huge amounts of natural resources, largely shipping that grain around the world. It's hugely damaging to wildlife. It's one of the leading causes of biodiversity. So if you care about wildlife, you should care about the way we farm animals as well. And particularly as well, it uses huge amounts of antibiotics. To keep an animal alive only until the age at which you slaughter them, in some of the conditions I've shown you, you need to use antibiotics to stop them dying before they get to that age. And I'm delighted to tell you that just yesterday, the European Union banned the routine use of antibiotics in farming, which is a huge step forward and really wonderful news. At Compassion, we have this triangle that we draw all the time, which is about how we try and make change happen in the world. We try and change political policy, we try and change corporate policy, and we use the power of the general public, of committed activists and volunteers to make that happen. So we don't rescue animals, and I have such huge admiration for those of you who do. Sometimes we can go months in my office without seeing a farm animal, but we do help millions, sometimes billions of them, by getting laws changed to protect their welfare. And we're doing okay so far. I'm not sure if you can see the detail of these, but these are some of the changes that we and other animal protection organisations have worked on. So animals in the European Union are recognised as sentient beings in law, which is wonderful. We have got rid of sow stalls, mostly, in the European Union, and they are completely banned in the UK and in Sweden. We've also got rid of veal crates, which are horrible, very small pens for calves. We got rid of the worst system of caged farming of hens, the barren battery cage, though it was replaced by another system that looks very similar, to be honest. We've also seen sows come out of sow stalls, as I mentioned, and the European Parliament have recently voted to phase out the use of rabbit cages as well. So there's amazing work happening, both politically, but also with our business partners. And the work that we've done with big businesses, big food businesses around the world, is set to benefit the lives of 1 billion animals. So all of that's wonderful, and we should all be patting ourselves on the back and feeling great. But actually, Compassion in World Farming and the farmed animal advocacy movement is a magnificent failure. Because no matter how many animals we help, we are outstripped by the number of new animals that are going into that system. This graph, you will appreciate, is not statistically accurate, but it does give an indication that over the past 5 years, 10 billion more animals are being farmed than were previously, and as I said, 2/3 of those are factory farmed. So the number of animals in that orange segment is an increased number of animals in the conditions you've seen. We just cannot keep up with the number of animals that are newly going into that system. And that's because people around the world are eating more meat. And it's really a vicious cycle in that factory farming enables cheap meat to be available, and that drives down the price of meat, and people want to buy more meat, and that drives more factory farming, and it just goes round and round and round. It's a really vicious cycle. And you can see the big red blobs on this map are places where there's particularly high meat consumption. I'm hoping you're going to be able to see this next slide because it's quite a nice demonstration. So this blue arrow at the top, the longest red lines are the places that eat the most meat. USA is at the top there. Europe is high up there as well. And India, you're way down the bottom. This is a chart you want to be at the bottom of. If the rest of the world ate like India, the world, again, would be a much better place. So thank you for everything you've done with your vegan activism to make that happen. And not only are people eating more meat, but they're changing the kind of meat they eat as well. And this is not good news because you can see on this rather horrible graph that the amount of beef and pork in some places, some high-consuming countries, is going down. The amount of chicken that's eaten is going up. The amount of meat that a chicken can produce versus a beef cow is very different. So more animals are required. And at Compassion, we believe that every animal is sentient and every animal has an equal right to a compassionate life. So that is bad news for us. So it's all a bit doom and gloom, and we're all going to hell in a handcart, and what are we going to do about it? Well, we have some ideas that I would really like to share with you and like to ask for your help with. because I really believe that by working together, there is some hope here. There are some chances to change this. And what I would really like to do in my time here at India for Animals is to learn from you and learn from what you're doing, because although we are successful in getting laws changed and getting corporate policy changed, we are not doing anywhere near well enough in changing the eating habits of people in the West. And I need your help. I need to learn from you what you're doing that is effective. There are a few other examples I'd like to share where I think perhaps we could work together, or there might be cause for hope. One of these is around working together, and this is a marketing slide from our latest campaign. It's a campaign to get rid of all cages in farming in Europe, all of them, pig cages, hen cages, half cages, every single one. And as you can see, we're using an image of a child to help us portray that, the idea that cage farming is a nightmare. The reason I wanted to share this with you is to get across the idea of, yes, we have to keep working to get rid of the worst systems at the same time as we're getting people to eat less meat. We have to help the animals today as well as the animals tomorrow. And in this particular campaign, we're working with 140 other organisations, all asking for exactly the same thing. And this is something that happens a lot in the US and across Europe, is that all of the animal welfare organisations get together, thanks to wonderful organisations over there that do the similar role to FIAPO, and they agree what they're going to ask for. They don't have to use the same tactics, but they agree what the ask is, what's the legislative change that they're trying to make, because that way they're all calling at the same time for the same thing, rather than calling for slightly different things. And it's made a huge difference to our ability to get laws changed. So I think if we could find ways of working together for joint aims, that would be incredibly powerful. And I would be very happy to work with Mr. Matta to see if we can do something in India to change legislation over here. The next idea I'd like to pitch to you is around alternative meats. And this is something that's really starting to take off in the US and in Europe. Both the idea of lab meat, which is a way in the future and quite complicated from an animal welfare point of view, but also things like the Beyond Burger, which is made entirely from plants. If you squeeze it, it bleeds, which personally I find repulsive, but seems to please people who like to eat meat. It tastes like meat, it cooks like meat, it smells like meat. For the people in America, where we know they need to eat 90% less meat than they are now, 90%, we need solutions like this. So I would ask you all, please, where products like this come onto markets, advocate for them, promote them, support them. This is, I think, a real step forward in trying to change the tide that we're fighting against. The next idea is quite a big one, and I have no idea how this is going to land in this room, but it was an idea I had a while ago, which is that there is a United Nations climate change agreement, as you'll all be aware, that sets mandatory targets for every country around the world to try and help us stay below too higher impacts from climate change. The way we currently produce food, particularly factory farming, is a global disaster on the same scale as climate change. And in fact, those two ideas are of course connected because the one contributes to the other. I think it would be wonderful if we could secure a United Nations convention to end factory farming and to change the way we produce food around the world. And I think that India could play a leading role in that process. Who knows? Why not? Set ambitions high. If you would like to be involved in that project, it's an idea at the moment, please do come and speak to me. Ideas like this only happen when you believe you can do it and you begin it. So let's begin it and see what happens. So, my whistle-stop tour through farmed animal advocacy, the things I'd like you to take away are we can achieve great things if we work together. That we need to learn from each other, and particularly we in Europe and in America and in China need to learn from the vegan advocacy work that you have been doing over here. We need to continue to tackle those worst systems, the cage systems, the crowded systems. We have to keep doing that work. We must support the development of meat alternatives because in some countries it's the only way we're going to have an impact on levels of consumption. And please, if you would like to, let's take this to the United Nations. Let's change the way we treat farmed animals forever in a way that can't be undone. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, for your talk, and we hope we can work together to better the lives of farmed animals around the world.